I am a human being and I kill human beings.
Before I knew it, I'd fired 4 shots at the door. I kept on shouting for Eva to phone the police.
Tests are underway to determine if a serial killer is on the loose in Centurion, Pretoria.
The dead won't bother you. It's the living you got to worry about.
Good evening, Profiler Nation. Welcome to another episode of Profiler Africa. My name is Paul Llewellyn. Tonight, we are delving into an intimate partner murder that shocked a tight-knit community. In 2021, Liezel de Jager, a beloved pastor, was brutally murdered at her home in Amanzimtoti. Her husband, Werner de Jager, was a prime suspect from the start, yet it took years before he was finally arrested. Before he could stand trial, he took his own life, leaving behind more questions than answers. What drives a spouse to kill? How do investigators piece together the truth when the killer won't talk? And what psychological factors play into cases like this? Joining us tonight to break it all down, we have criminologist Naomi Griffiths joining us for the first time. She spent 11 years at SAPS. And of course, we're joined by Jared Labuskaghni, who was the head of the forensic psychology section at SAPS from 2001 to 2016. He is, of course, our profiler. Good evening to you guys. Very nice to see you this Tuesday evening. Is everyone well?
Yes, thanks.
Nice. Doing good. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. Naomi, it's wonderful to have you here with us. Before we get into tonight's discussion, I'm just going to do a little bit of admin. Just a quick reminder, guys, to please subscribe to Profiler Africa. The more subscribers we get, the more the channel can be sustainable and what have you. You can also become a channel member. Not only are you supporting the growth of a proudly South African true crime channel, but you'll also get access to some exclusive content that we put in the members area. You can also access exclusive content if you join the effort through Patreon. Just check out patreon.com/Profiler Africa. Again, if you'd like to contribute to the show. Don't forget to join the live chat. You can share your questions for Naomi and Gerard. We'll tackle them throughout the show and group them together for the last few minutes of the show, as we usually do. And of course, if you send a super like, we will give you a shout out, and that's a great way to support the effort as well. So welcome to the show. It's lovely to have you here with us, as always. Lovely to see everybody joining in the chat. Good evening, everyone. Gerard. Tonight we head down to Amanzimtoti, but first, Gerard, I think we need to ask Naomi to explain a little bit of how she ended up in the world of law enforcement. What happened in Naomi's life to lead her down this path? Naomi, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Granted, it wasn't the initial pathway. I wanted to be a lawyer. But I took criminology in my 3rd year and kind of fell in love with it. So I took a very nice job after studying at PSG as a financial advisor. And when I got the call to climb on the bus the next day for police college, I did. So the rest is history. Granted, it was my aim to be a criminologist in the police and not just a normal uniform member. So for the past 4 years of my career, I did do that. So I'm very grateful for that and the experience I've got from that.
Okay.
So you ended up obviously at the investigative psychology section. I'd already left by that time. So you ended up there, but what were your sort of jobs that you had in the police leading up to that point when you joined the IPU?
First, I was a detective in serious and violent crimes. I worked in Moffat View, which is a pretty rough area. I had to get used to that. And then after that, I worked at Garsfontein, also as a detective, doing mainly unnatural deaths, murders, things like that. And then for a small period of time, I was a forensic analyst at the ballistics section. So, and then kind of when the post opened up, I applied and got the post at IPS, which, it's the dream job for anyone that's a criminologist in South Africa.
Because at that point, IPS, when I was there, we never had criminologists. It was really your detectives with either, like you say, a violent crime background or sexual crime background. Then we had, the psychologists, And we kind of had one or two researchers over the years that joined us. So you were part of this new generation of, say, criminologists that were joining. Were you one of the first ones, I think, that actually joined the IPU?
Yes, when we got there, there was 3 posts that was advertised, 3 captains posts. So we were the first 3 criminologists working under the main criminologist, which was Lieutenant Colonel Mayberg. Before that, she was the only one countrywide. So at that time, we dealt with cases, the 4 of us dealt with cases countrywide. And then now they started implementing that in all the provinces as positions of warrant officers. So that's when I left last year and started my own company. That's what it was still like that when I left.
And kind of at the IP, what role would you typically have? And this is obviously going to lead into the talk today, but what role did you typically play in a case when you guys were contacted as criminologists to assist?
Yes, so we were not that often contacted to the scene. Being countrywide, it's very difficult to actually get to the scene in time before the body is removed. So mainly from crime scene photos, from case dockets, we would do crime scene analysis on single cases, single murders, and then linkage analysis on serial rapes, serial murders. And oftentimes we also do pre-sentence reports before a person is sentenced, and then also interviewing and a little bit of training as well. So kind of like an all-rounded job within the unit as well.
And I think, yeah, let's perhaps get straight into this case. How did you get involved in this case? And I'm kind of going to let you just sort of tell the story, and Paul and I will probably jump in and ask questions as we go.
No problem. So basically, one of 2 things will happen to get a case at IPS. First, IO will contact you requesting your assistance, or other times we see cases on the news, and then we think that it might be a psychological aspect to the case. So this was the case in question now, the Mums and Toti case. We saw that actually on the news. So and then we contacted the IO, and I think it happened on the 13th of October 2021. And we drove there, me and Colonel de Lange drove there on the 19th of October 2021 for a week to go and basically assist, and me as a criminologist to see if I can offer any assistance with regards to the criminological aspect around the crime, to see who is a possible suspect and so forth.
So kind of really, it's kind of profiling stuff. And I think what you were doing was kind of very often what I would have been doing, or Yanni himself as a detective would have been doing. It's kind of in the realm of profiling, really, what we would offer. And I think maybe you had the same experience. Like you say, you often don't know what you're going to end up doing, because you might get a request from the detective, come up with X. And you get there and you realize, oh, actually, we could help you with A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and you might not even do X, because you realize all the other areas that you could help that they're just not even aware of.
Yes, that's true. So sometimes we call to the scene to just analyze the crime scene, to just point out certain aspects that does not make sense on the crime scene. But as in the Mums and Toti case, we ended up also interviewing Werner at the end. So that was also kind of part of that, and interviewing all of the other people, because we spent a week in the Mums and Toti. So it was kind of like also investigative work a little bit, combined with criminological work as well.
For those listeners who may not be South Africa, may not be familiar with South Africa and some of the small towns around South Africa, just give us a sense of Amanzimtoti, what kind of community it is.
Yes, I think going to KZN, it's a smaller community than Durban. So it's kind of like one of those smaller communities, as a lot of the friends and relatives of the deceased told us that everyone knows everyone there. So it was a very Afrikaans area which we visited at that time, knowing that KZN is mainly English, but in that area it was mainly Afrikaans. So a very tight-knit community. Like I said, smaller than the biggest cities like Durban and Pietermaritzburg.
Okay, and then just tell us a little bit about this family, kind of what they a bit about the family and their standing in the community as well.
Yes, so Liezel de Jager, the deceased, was married to Werner de Jager. They had 2 kids, 8 and 9, at the time of her death. And she was the local pastor at the NG Church. He was an ATM technician, kind kind of like doing odd jobs here and there, not really a very stable employment record. But she was the pastor, so she was well loved in the community, well liked. There was really no one that wanted to harm her. So that's also why we decided to take this case, because it just appeared that it's too random for a random person or someone she didn't know to actually want to harm her.
Okay. Okay. All right. So that's the family. That's the town we're at. You guys get that. Talk us through kind of what you walked into initially. Then when you arrived in Amanzimtoti.
Okay. As I said,
Sorry, I wanted to jump in also.
No,
Who was
it's
dealing
fine.
with this case? Was it dealt
Yeah.
with by the local detectives, or was it a specialized unit that often influences who gets involved and how experienced the people are?
Initially, it was dealt with the Brighton Beach local detectives. It was a captain that was the IO there. So when we arrived there in Amanzimtoti on the 19th of October, we had a meeting with the IO. And that's kind of what we did with all the cases, is to have an initial meeting with the IO to kind of establish where is the case at, what has been done. Is there any possible suspects? Is there any specific things they would want us to look at? So we had that initial meeting, and he kind of like glued us in with the whole all of the facts surrounding the case, all of the facts surrounding the family. So we got a pretty good picture of what it was like. Obviously, we had to go and visit the crime scene. We did that the following day, and then in that week, we literally spoke to anyone we can find, ranging from domestic workers to gardeners to people working at the church to other pastors that's working at the church to friends she ran with, because I will explain now where the running came in, but and also her parents that was also there, and also Werner that was there at the house as well.
Great stuff. So what did you guys do so how did things progress from there?
Yeah.
Okay, so initially when we went there that week, our job is actually not to kind of like steer the investigation, is to give an expert opinion about it. So coming back from that week, I did a report, a crime scene analysis on the scene, which I also handed in to the investigating officer. And from there, the investigation had to take its course. But if you want me, I can elaborate a little bit more about the story, and how we saw what was going on in the crime scene, or on the crime scene, and also surrounding the crime scene.
Absolutely.
Yes, please. Yeah.
And I'll bring up
Okay.
some images as well that we can speak to.
Okay, perfect. So basically, let me just go get a little bit ahead there. On the 10th of October, so 3 days before the actual murder, around 7 o'clock of the night, the panic button was pushed. They had a panic button in the house. They were staying at and for lack of an English word, I'm sorry, the pastorie. So, which is made available to the pastor by the church. So they were all staying there as a family. And then the panic button was pushed. Werner they called Werner, and he said all was in order, and that was left as is. So, coming to the day of the murder on the 13th of October 2021, Liezel used to jog in the mornings. She used to meet up friends to jog with. And as per usual, she got up at 4 that morning, left for a normal jog. We also collaborated this with a video footage from across the road, that she actually left there around 4:37 that morning. And then also, as per the watches of her friends running with her, we also clarified that they actually started running at around 4:45 to around 6:30. And then she returned home. So, what was interesting about this case is that Werner said he was sleeping throughout the time. And around 6:07 in the morning, the panic button was pushed again. And the ET, or the responding officer, phoned, and we got hold of that recordings. And after I think 5 times, he got hold of Werner, which then said all was in order. But he sounded very, very out of breath, and then kind of like everything was fine from there. And then, as per usual arrangement, he will get the kids ready for school. It was a weekday. And then as they were leaving around 7, he then saw Liezel lying there in the small corridor next to the house, and he pushed the panic button again. And then the emergency people responded. So that was actually what transpired. And what was kind of very interesting and weird about the case is the pushing of the panic button, which raised red flags from day one.
Okay. Just talk us through this this image here. What exactly are we looking at here?
So this image is at the back of the image, which is cut off, which you can't see, is the gate to the property, which was wide open. And also the family had 2 dogs, one big and one small. They were seen on video footage running around in the streets. So, and then her car is parked on the other side of what you can see now. There's a Renault in the garage, and then her Honda was parked on the other side. It was still parked there, but you can't see that on the photo. And then around the corner there is leading up to the kitchen door, and that's in the small corridor where she was found.
Okay. All right. And we can go to the actual to a shot of the actual scene now. So here. Okay, so if you want to talk us through this a little then, and we can maybe then go and we've got some close-up shots of some of the evidence that was in the immediate vicinity around the body.
Yeah, so like I said, she was lying there on her back, face up. So, and she was still dressed in her running clothes, so we could collaborate that she actually came from running. Her pants were pulled down to her knees and her panties, so she was kind of half naked from the bottom down. And then around her was all of her personal belongings, her handbag, her cell phone, some of her car keys, her house keys, as well as a spade with a little bit of blood that was broken in half. It's a small garden spade that was found next to her as well, which kind of also was weird for us looking at the crime scene and the crime scene photos, because we could immediately kind of like say the motive was not robbery, or and in this case also the pathologist confirmed that she was not sexually abused, so we could also eliminate that as a motive.
Okay.
So if I can just jump in with the question. So if I recall from the photograph, where obviously we blocked it for YouTube purposes, you said her sort of running pants and her underwear was pulled down sort of towards the knees, but there was something covering the genital area. Was that by the police? Because, I mean, I'm sure you also encountered the police love to cover up bodies when they're exposed. Or was that as it was discovered? Because, of course, that changes what we might interpret about that scene if a cop covered the modesty of the person versus the suspect.
No, that was actually confirmed by Werner, and we asked him specifically about that in the interview, that he covered the with that pink. It was like kind of a pink top that she had around her waist. I think it was kind of cool that morning, so he covered her up. And yes, it is seen as undoing. And if it was the police or a concerned family member, I would have said tertiary staging. But this is definitely, I think, and I also wrote in my report that this could possibly be undoing by the suspect himself.
Yeah, because you want to make it look like a rape or attempted rape, but you kind of still have that sense of, I don't want to leave her looking, this is my wife, and I don't want other guys looking at, that might be the sort of philosophy underlying why that would have been done. Yeah, and you said the pathologist confirmed there was no indications of forced penetration or anything like that.
No, there was actually no indications of any penetration at all. So, as we also confirmed that their love life or whatever was not going really well, they didn't have, like intimate relations since I think 4 or 5 months earlier or prior to that.
Okay, great stuff. And what was the cause of death? What was that?
It was very difficult to determine, and that was also funny by looking at the spade, and there was a mark or a wound around her neck. We initially thought that the spade was kind of the weapon used to inflict that mark, and that was what caused the death. But and there was, the pathologist later confirmed that it was actually suffocation. and there was no strangulation marks. There was no, that was kind of like a after the fact, just a flesh wound that was not deep enough to cause an actual death. So it was suffocation.
Okay, and perhaps just for the viewers, the difference typically between strangulation and suffocation. Strangulation is when you've got, either a hand around the person's neck or a ligature, whereas, smothering tends to be, you're covering the mouth and nose, or you're putting a pillow over the person's face. It's that kind of, so that's not really the most common way of killing people. Usually it's going to be kind of strangulation. So that's interesting. Yeah. Any other sort of things or concerns that stood out for you when you did that initial report?
Yes, I mean, like there was a lot of things that that concerned me. First and foremost was the smash phone, for instance. There was a lot of like hints at Werner saying that he wanted to be the husband, the concerned husband. He tried to phone her multiple times, and then also we asked him during the interview, "Did you not hear her phone?" And of course, he said no because her phone was smashed. So kind of that was also a very weird thing. There was no dogs barking. He was actually seen on the veranda around 6:09, which he also stated that he went to fetch the dogs, which is on the other side of the house. But I mean, like, no dogs were inside; they were in the street. There was a lot of inconsistencies relating to his version of events and the crime scene itself.
So how did things kind of progress from that point onwards?
Slowly. So initially after that, I handed in my report, and then we kind of assisted in the investigation as we could, but we didn't take it over. We don't take over the investigation; it remains with the IO. So it kind of lingered for a very long time. There was also a change in how Section 205 subpoenas was going to be served. There was a change with regards to the Poppy Act and things like that. So it kind of slurred on from there. And then by 2023, the deceased father, which is also an ex-policeman, he contacted Action SA, Ian Cameron, and they got involved. Cold case unit got involved. I went to a meeting with them and stated everything that we know and what we could see from the crime scene, and definitely 100% sure that it was someone very close to her that did this to her. And so he was arrested, I think, in November 2023.
And like at which point did people start to think, okay, it's probably the husband? Was that quite soon, or was it sort of months later, weeks later?
It was quite soon, and it was funny. They had a gardener coming every Wednesday, and the gardener came, and he initially also he went back to the church because he worked at the church and the pastory. So he worked days on, days off, and he went back to the church, and he initially on that day told everyone this is Werner who did it. I don't know how he knew that, or did he maybe see the crime scene? He saw that there was nothing missing. But yeah, initially people did think there was something strange going on, although I think the family of the deceased, as well as the friends of the deceased, wanted not to believe it because they saw Werner as a soft person, although he had a history of a lot of mental illnesses. So so I think right away there was a lot of suspicions, although no one would say it loudly.
Mm-hmm. And then at what point did you end up interviewing him? And did anybody interview the children at any point? That maybe just some background information about what's going on in the house before that incident.
Yeah, we interviewed the Werner before we did the children. We didn't want to upset them; they've been through a lot. But we also interviewed them in that week. So we initially had the interview with Werner. I think it was around. We got there on the Monday. I think it was around the.
Oops! I wonder if we have not hit load shedding in Pretoria. Oh.
Too sharp. Look, I mean, this is the reality of doing live podcasts, isn't it? So sometimes you have to deal with the power going out in Pretoria. at 8:25, which I don't know why it's gone up to 8:25, but
we'll give her a chance to get that all sorted out. Let me see. I see a WhatsApp coming through. We can just find out.
yeah, there we go. Let's see what she has to say.
Okay. She'll be back. But let me just perhaps chat while she's coming up again. So, I mean, so you've got basically a crime scene that's hinting at a sexual crime, but there's no real evidence of penetration. There's no indications that the suspect was disturbed, that, he was going to finish the rape, but then he ran off because he heard people coming. You got the cell phone lying there. So again, and I mean, this broken spade, which doesn't actually seem to be used in the case. So again, that's going to make you think, but this is just not adding up. What's the real motive for this crime? Yeah. So again, that's going to obviously have those queries and questions. And I think, any good investigating officer is going to put that together. It's not like you need a criminologist or a profiler to come and tell you that. But it's, sometimes you don't necessarily have the most experienced investigating officer. And if I'm not mistaken, we'll check with Naomi. I think the detective in this was Captain Marius van der Looy from Brighton Beach. Now, you might recall the Brighton Beach axe murderer case, Pandita Nchongwana, which we've discussed before. Yes. That was managed out of Brighton Beach. Memory serves me correct, I think Marius, who was involved in that task team, along with Jason McGray and Rico Naidu, was actually, if I'm not mistaken, the investigating officer in this case. So if it is, you obviously had a very, very experienced investigating officer who was obviously leading this particular case. So that's quite interesting.
This is categorized as an intimate partner murder, and we've discussed a couple of these. What are some of the kind of earmarks of what are some of the typical aspects of that type of crime locally, and is it typical for a small town like Amanzimtoti? I mean, what types of crimes have you come across in that
the weirdest crimes I've ever had have been in small towns. Yeah. So just really bizarre stuff. And intimate partner murders occur everywhere because it's got to do with people and their relationships. Now, typically, it's quite characteristic to find a lot of violence in intimate partner murders, specifically if it's one that was a sort of explosion. You get that overkill. Of course, if it's more calculated and planned, you will get people trying to make it look like a robbery gone wrong or a sex crime or a hijacking that went wrong. The more effort that you're going to put into it and the more you think about it beforehand. So you can kind of get this from the spectrum of, getting other people to do it for you and you have an alibi, to this angry explosion of anger that causes overkill. And of course, that's very difficult to cover up afterwards because, most average robbers aren't going to, stab you 150 times or smash you with a baseball bat 50 times.
I mean, the staging aspect of this case seems a little bit, seems interesting because, if you're exposing the genital area like was done here, then you're implying that there's some kind of a sexual component to this. I mean, surely that's the rationale. And yet that there's not going to be anything, any evidence beyond that if there hasn't been an actual sexual act committed.
Yeah, I mean, just
it seems like a big hole to leave if you're the suspect.
Yeah. But the thing is, they've got to look at what are my options here to mislead everybody. So, of course, from a forensic perspective, if the people at the crime scene bag the hands, now typically that would mean you'd have to put like these sort of manila envelopes over the hands. So I'm trying to get this over the hands. And then when the doctor does the autopsy, then they will take the scrapings underneath the nails. Now, if you haven't bagged the hands and the body arrives at the autopsy, the doctor won't scrape for nails because they'll say, well, then anybody, you could have brushed against them and scraped got DNA under their skin. I still don't agree with that because if your prime suspect's DNA is still found under those fingernails, that guy's still going to have to do a lot of explaining. So, but that's kind of usually the procedure. It has to be bagged. Otherwise, the doctor, when they do that, the rape kit, so to speak, they're not going to cut the nails to get sort of whatever DNA could be underneath the nails.
Okay. We've got a question. Sorry, let me just see if I can show this in a little more. Okay, and we've got our guest joining us. But the question is, at this point of the podcast, with the info you have, what would you guys think was the motive? Okay, let's see. I think we've got Naomi back with us through the wonder of television. No, Naomi, don't worry. This is our international subscribers and viewers are getting a little taste of life in South Africa. Power cuts, load shedding, that's something that we have to deal with. So me and Gerard have been continuing to natter amongst ourselves, discussing some of the components of the case. And we actually had a question come up. At this point of the podcast, with the info we have, what would you guys start to think was the motive? I don't know if that's a bit premature now that we've got you back, Naomi, but if you've got some comments on that now, we can park it a bit later. But that's where we were at. We were just discussing that question. Let's maybe, if you'd like to give some comment on that.
Yes, definitely. I think to answer that, I need to tell you a little bit what Werner told us during the interview, where we interviewed him. So kind of rocky life, a lot of mental issues. I would not use the name loser, but he was kind of like living in the shadow of Liezel. I think she was a vibrant one. She was the one, the go-getter, and he was kind of like living in that shadow. Also work-wise, she had a stable employment. He was jumping around between work a lot of the time, and also had previous suicide attempts. So and he was also later diagnosed with bipolar 2. So I think there was a lot of things, but ultimately what I'm just reading from what the court said, or what the IO said in the court, like the preliminary court proceedings, was that there was life insurance policies taken out on her name by him, or her life by him, and also the fact that they were married out of community of property, which we established with the profile we drew of him.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, I mean, the thoughts are now going to be, this isn't appearing like a normal sort of murder. There's no real clear motive indicated here from the crime scene. It's trying to look like it's a sexual crime, but it actually isn't really presenting properly as a sexual crime. So again, like you say, the only reason people are going to stage is going to be people close to this individual. A random robber is not going to try and make his whatever look like something else. They're going to get away as soon as possible. And again, I think about it. I mean, how would you have known she was going to be there at that point in time? So your average robber who's looking to rape someone, it's just coming across almost like it would be too opportunistic for this to be some random stranger. But of course, you've got to get the evidence to prove that. It's one thing to have these suspicions. So when you interviewed Werner, was he interviewed as a suspect, or were you interviewing him under the pretense of you're the victim's husband and we just want to know what you can tell us?
Look, we didn't want to actually scare him to involve maybe legal representation, or before he involved them, we want to get the picture from him. And also initially he gave a statement to the police, which kind of like laid his alibi in the form of a written document, and we wanted to collaborate that with the interview. So we went from the standpoint as just establishing what his background was, their relationship, and then also a little bit about the murder, but we did not interrogate him per se. We kind of just interviewed him to clarify certain things. And then also later we can use the conflicting statements made by him also to our advantage. So we did that. And yes, to come back to your statement, Gerard, that staging, I did my master's dissertation on staging and intimate partner murders. So kind of staging is almost always done by an intimate partner or someone that knows the deceased. Like you said, it will be time consuming for a random person who could have just grabbed the cell phone, the handbag, even got away with a car to actually stage a scene like that.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. Just first of all, when you're approaching the interview, what is the discussion that you're having kind of before you're going into the room? Are you talking about who's gonna speak to him initially? What are some of just the intentional tactics that you're considering and applying? And then secondly, during the interview, is he trying to lead you down any other alternative narratives?
You meaning we are playing good cop and bad cop?
Well, yeah, I
No.
mean, just give us a little insight into that kind of behind the scenes. We see on the American crime shows that, the one cop will come out and they send in the next guy kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, do you guys, plan the tactics in that regard at all?
Yes, I mean, like, at the time we interviewed him, we had various statements and various information from other sources, so we could actually verify some of the things he said or not, or which he lied about in the interview, and actually address him on that specific issues. So going into the interview, we had definitely a lot of cards in our hands, knowing everything. I've drawn the profile, everything, so you couldn't actually lie to us. And we spoke to him about certain things that he did lie about. And then throughout the interview, what was funny about Werner, he constantly tried to play the victim card. He was making himself seem as this caring husband, downplaying any maybe domestic issues they had or anything like that. He was absolutely playing the husband, the loving husband, and the victim. And he steered the interview in a lot of ways towards the direction of his mental illnesses, how he struggled with things, and told us actually a very, like, a short, maybe 15 minutes of a 3-hour interview about the actual murder. So he didn't want to elaborate on the facts because I think he knew he was lying about them.
Okay. Sorry, Jared, you muted yourself again there, Jared.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I said he's going to talk about everything but the actual incident. So 3 hours of waffle and drivel, and a little bit as far as possible, as little as possible of the incident. When you were off, when the power tripped, I just had a question. You mentioned Brighton Beach, and you mentioned it. Was it, if I'm not mistaken, was it Captain Marius van der Looy who initially was involved in this? Was I correct in that?
That was, yeah.
Okay. And as I was saying earlier, I mean, he was quite an experienced guy. He was involved in the Brighton Beach axe murder cases that we've spoken about before on this. So how did things sort of go from there? I mean, you guys obviously have to make a decision. Are we going to do something or not? There was one question also about, there was criticism towards the police dragging their feet. How did things go?
I'm going to bring up that question, and maybe we can address it here. I think it's Gillian.
That's Gillian de Jager, the journalist.
Investigating the case was accused of neglect and failure by Action Society. What is your take there?
Yes, I've seen and I've heard everything that was said about the police. And I think, yes, I think although the detective in the case was very experienced in investigating murder cases, I think, like I said, the Poppy Act came into play. There was a lot of changes with regards to the processes, being the forensic units being in Pretoria and then being in Amanzimtoti or Brighton Beach also kind of made that difficult. But yes, I would say that the police could have handled this a little bit better and a little bit quicker. I just want to also say our work, or our role at the investigative psychology section, is not to investigate the case, but kind of like my role ended with me giving the crime scene analysis, and then later I will obviously testify in court if need be. But throughout the investigation, I'm not constantly involved. We deal with other cases. It's like we deal with a case and we move on to another case. So, and that's also from the investigation side. At the investigative psychology section with Lieutenant Colonel de Jager, he also kind of like did everything he could possibly do to assist the IO in that week, and then kind of step back for the IO to do his actual work.
Yeah, I mean, I guess people just need to understand that there are challenges that you guys face. I mean, we've spoken a lot about some of the challenges during Gerard's tenure there up until 2016. So I'd be interested, just as maybe a follow-on from this point, just to understand, what was the reality of being in the unit at that stage, as far as support from the powers that be and available resources, etc. Just paint that picture a little bit so that folks understand what parameters you're working within.
Yes, as I explained, we used to work nationwide as criminologists. We were only 4 by then, and the investigators in our unit was also very few. So, and saying that, it was very difficult to get to places due to lack of resources, cell phones, vehicles, lack of basic electronic equipment. So, it was kind of frustrating, and even coming down to lack of actually stationery for that matter. So I don't want to speak negative about the police. I've learned a lot about with the police, but really there is, I think, across the board a lack of resources within the police.
Yeah, I mean, we don't like to be negative either. I think this, critical, I think is the word that we want to, kind of just cast an eye so that people understand some of the realities there, and they can contextualize. Because I've always said, the thing about the South African police service is that you have some of the best cops in the world doing some of the most incredible work in the world. And we talk about that a lot on the show, but then you've got a lot who are, those day-to-day cops that we all have to deal with that really, do affect people's perception of the police service in South Africa, and rightly so to a large degree. Just want to say thank you to Katzen for our super sticker. We love our little purple cat there. Thank you very much. A question from Arena Fantonda. Did the staging seem panicked or well planned?
Thank you, Arena, for the question. Whilst doing my master's, I found that there's different typologies of stages. Most is not well planned. Most do not plan the staging ahead of the time. It's kind of like, oh, I've done this murder, I need to cover it up now. And then as they're going, they're covering it up. So I think Werner, in this situation, allegedly, or what I believe, is he killed her, and then he's like, okay, but her belongings is still here, so what other motive can I possibly stage it as? A sexual murder. And that's when he pulled down the pants. So I think it was kind of in the spur of the moment, not well planned at all.
Yeah.
And also, just perhaps one of the complications with intimate partner murders is that, the forensic evidence there is not going to mean as much. If there was his semen, well, it's his wife. If there's even now his DNA under the nail scrapings, well, fingerprints, it's his house. So it also gets complicated when it is an intimate partner, because the things we typically look at, which was a foreign fingerprint that shouldn't be here, or DNA that doesn't match anybody we know, kind of become to a large degree very meaningless. And I think that's why these cases get very complicated to prove. And it's got to be like timelines, and this didn't add up. And it's almost like the circumstantiality of it. Unless the guy's going to actually confess, it gets, in a way, far more difficult, because the stuff that's there is actually entitled to be there because it was it's his own house.
Yes, like I said, like I explained to Arina, I think the staging wasn't planned, but what's interesting about the panic button being pushed 3 days prior to the murder, I think he did want to kind of make an alibi, because he stated in the interview that the panic button from time to time would go off by itself. And then also having that as, oh, it went off on the 10th of October and then on that morning of the 13th. So I think there was a certain amount of planning from his side with regards to the actual murder. Although not the staging, it was actually just creating an alibi, or kind of working around the forensic or the evidence that we found, the panic button, things like that. So, but yeah, like you said, Gerard, that forensic evidence do not play as big a role, because his DNA and fingerprints will be everywhere.
Do you think that you mentioned that earlier that day, the panic button had been pressed and he answered the phone sort of out of breath, saying everything's okay. Do you think it's quite likely that in the struggle she had pressed the panic button, and that kind of, when he answered, was him out of breath, having just committed the murder? Is that kind of the thought process that we're considering for that?
I 100% think that was what happened. You couldn't see close enough, but me examining the crime scene photos, the panic button was actually placed underneath her body. So either she fell on it or onto it, or she had pressed it, and then he had to obviously make a plan to say, oh no. And I think by that time, that's why they called like 5 times. And you must remember that in that 5 times, I say they called 5 times, but it was a minute. And then he kind of came up with this plan. So I think she fell onto it or pressed it, and then he's like, "Oh, what have I done? I must make a plan now." And on the actual video or the recordings that we listened to from the security company, he seems kind of out of breath. He actually, while we interpreted as he made a mistake of the actual address, things like that, being in distress and things like that, as opposed to the actual call when her body was discovered, he sounded way more composed.
Okay. And Henry just commented, or he wanted to see the reaction time.
Yeah.
Pressing the buttons on the day before, 2 days before. Yeah. That's a possibility.
From Pierre, did he exhibit any tendency of violent behavior previously that you know of? We might have covered this a little.
I think sometimes what happens inside homes is only known by the couple, or is not necessarily known by the immediate family or friends, because all of them actually said Werner would not hurt a fly. They actually very much spoke very, very nicely about him. He was a good person. He only would hurt himself. And she was also a very, very private person. So there was no indications. We asked about that. There was no indications of prior domestic violence, no cases opened, nothing like that. So, and I didn't get to that the other now, is we spoke to the daughters as well, obviously in the presence of their maternal grandparents. But they also admitted they actually covered for their father, saying that he was asleep in his bed whilst the panic button was going off. They spoke very highly of him. I think him being the only remaining parent alive, and not wanting to be separated from him at that stage.
Okay.
I kind of recall at some point, though, he kind of just disappeared. And for a couple of days, and then kind of allegedly had wanted to commit suicide or been admitted. How did that kind of happen and come about?
Yes, I think it was the 21st of October. So, the 27th of October. So slightly after we've been there. During the interview, we asked him if he was willing to take a polygraph, which, as you know, Gerard, has no, evidential value, but we can kind of go and steer the investigation in direction from there. But he said yes, depending on his medication and what his psychiatrist said. And then on the 27th, we just we heard on the news, I think the IO called us and said Werner is missing. And he was found shortly after that in a sugar plantation on a farm nearby. What was weird is, yes, although there was various chemicals in the vehicle with him, there was also food and things like that. So I don't know if it was a camp out or a suicide attempt. I can't confirm.
And I think he'd been gone for a day or two at that point, hadn't he? I think if I'm again talking on a correction.
Yes, I think he was gone from the 27th for 2 days, and then he was found. You must remember that he did this previously, where he also would drive to a remote location. First suicide attempt, he actually cut his wrists on a farm. The other time, he went to Grobbies and he tried to gas himself inside the vehicle. So he had a tendency of driving into a veld or remote location and attempting suicide. But I'm not sure if I can say this, but I don't think it was an actual attempt. I think it was kind of like a botched attempt at suicide.
Okay. You mentioned the other case in Agrabis where he tried it. Was that pre the murder, or you're saying were those multiple incidences after the murder?
No, the two incidents since the wrists and the gassing was pre-murder. Actually pre them moving to Amanzimtoti in 2019. So it was all pre that. But what was interesting is that he was diagnosed with bipolar 2, like I mentioned, in August 2021. And he himself said he had times where he's very irritable, just 2 weeks prior to another episode or a manic or whatever episode. So that was kind of interesting. But he has struggled with depression, anxiety, things, a lot of mental issues, and also people in his family also struggled with that.
Okay. Guys, we're going to take a couple more questions from some of the viewers in a sec, and then we can also talk about how the court case rolled out and what happened there, or what happened in the next phase. First, though, guys, I would just like to thank everybody for joining the podcast tonight. Please do hit the subscribe button and become a subscriber to Profiler. The more subscribers we have, the more sustainable we are. Thank you, everyone, joining the chat. We welcome your super likes. You will get a mention if you drop us a super like. Also, we invite you to become a member of the channel. We've got some great exclusive content from the interviews that we filmed around the country on various cases over the years, last few years. So a good reason. Not only are you supporting local content, but you're also getting some great original content as well. And this episode of Profiler Africa is brought to you by plotshift.co.za, your trusted partner for TV and commercial content production. Get in touch if you need a helping hand. Okay, there we go. Great. Thank you, everyone, with your likes and subscribes. I'm going to jump in. I want to just ask a couple of questions that came up in the chat here regarding the gardener. So we've got Mariana first, who so you said the gardener immediately said it was Werner. Was there other people who knew them too that pointed the finger at him?
Thank you, Mariana. Like I explained, I'm sorry, people didn't necessarily want to say it, although we could, and we pressed them for some kind of guidance. But it was only the gardener that initially said that. The other family members and friends could not, I don't know if they didn't want to believe or couldn't believe it, but they initially thought it was someone from outside. They didn't think it was Werner initially. But however, they did say that he was a suspicious person. He was kind of withdrawn. He was kind of the opposite of what Liezel was. But they didn't want to say it out loud.
Okay. And since the gardener was certain that Werner killed her, did anyone specifically in the family and immediate friends think the gardener could have anything to do with it? Did you look at the gardener?
Thank you for the question. No,
Yes.
we didn't look at the gardener from the beginning. He had a solid alibi. The investigating team also followed that up before we got there. Him being there on a Wednesday, and it happened on a Wednesday, so that was kind of like a coincidence or a suspicion. So they immediately followed up on that, and he did have an alibi. He was with his family. So no, the gardener was really just, I think by that time, people were saying he's crazy. People were saying he's just out on a hunch. And now, looking back at what we know now, he was right from the start. So he might be a good profiler.
Exactly. Yeah, I've got a future in law enforcement. I don't know if this is a good time to jump into this part, something that we discussed before coming on air here tonight. But Gillian once again has asked, is it true that he allegedly caused the death of another person in a vehicle accident or something similar before his arrest? Now, like I say, this is something we discussed earlier. So Naomi, tell us.
Well, I wasn't involved in that investigation. As I said, my role actually ended when I wrote my report and handed it in. I was waiting for the court date to testify again. But I've read from the newspapers and seen from the newspapers, and knowing his mental issues, and he also specifically mentioned the medication he was on. And I think that was also stated in the newspaper articles that he suffered from blackouts due to the medication, and that him knowing that he shouldn't actually have driven a motor vehicle. So he got into an accident. I think it was somewhere in the Free State, where 2 people were killed. And I think the investigating officer in that case also said that they would have changed that charge from culpable homicide to murder. So yes, I think he would have stood trial for 3 murders then instead of just 1.
Sure. Okay.
And was he ultimately ever arrested at any point? Because you're going to get into what happened later with him, but was he ever actually arrested for this crime?
For the culpable homicide or the murder of Liezel?
The murder of Liezel.
Okay. Yes, he was. So after Action Society actually got into the picture, and the case was handed to the cold case unit. It was very, very soon after that he was arrested. I think it was the 23rd of November, 2023. 2023, if I'm not mistaken. So then he was arrested, and then he was denied bail on multiple occasions, partly due to the family being scared that he's going to take the kids, and other reasons that he might hurt himself, etc. So he was formally arrested on the 23rd, and then subsequent court hearings, and I think he was awaiting trial when obviously he passed away.
Okay.
And do you have at your fingertips, like, what was the kind of evidence that they had against him that really made them feel, let's go ahead and arrest? I'm not sure if you have that information.
Yes. Initially, the data from his cell phone was like I explained, from the subpoenas, or the Section 205 subpoenas. For those who don't know, is you have to get a court order to actually get cell phone records, and being that taking a lot of time, some of the data got lost, but the cold case unit actually managed to find some of the data, and could actually then prove that he was on his cell phone and he was awake at the time when the panic button was pushed. And then also a lot of circumstantial evidence, like, for instance, the cause of death, not corroborating with the scene, and his subsequent suicide attempts, or him disappearing. And just a whole a whole bunch of circumstantial evidence was actually what made the team arrest him in the end.
Whoa, Gerard, Gerard. You are the Gerard. We're gonna have to. I'm gonna come to your house tomorrow, and I'm taking away the mute button. Okay, I'm removing.
Well, normally you say I'm busy clearing my throat, and I haven't muted myself, so now I'm.
I'll tell you what. I'll take the coughing. Okay.
Okay. Okay. So, and obviously, what I said in my muted state is, and what ultimately happened to him.
Yes, so ultimately, and that's also according to newspaper articles, whilst he was awaiting trial, he committed suicide, or there was alleged overdose of his medication, which was probably given to him due to his mental illnesses, and had to be given to him. So I don't know how that was controlled, or but he ultimately, I think he managed to actually commit suicide for real this time.
And that was in custody, you said, because he didn't get bail. Is that correct?
Yes, in custody, he committed suicide, or allegedly committed suicide from overdose.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. And the children, do we know what ultimately happened to them?
Yes, they went to stay with the maternal grandparents. It's not even since he was arrested. They were immediately staying with the maternal grandparents, so they were immediately taken away from Werner. So he didn't get custody of the kids even straight after the murder. Before, and I mean, like, it was years before he was actually arrested, 2 years. So they stayed with the maternal grandparents, and as far as I know, they're still staying with them.
Sure, poor little kids.
Yeah. I mean, that's always the tragedy in cases like this, and these kind of family incidents, is you
We've lost Paul now.
Sorry, you often think how much consideration these folks make when they're when they're committing these acts, because the wake can be terrible, can't it?
Yeah, actually losing both parents.
Exactly.
It's yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's have a look what we've got. Cause of the death. I think we've covered most of our questions up to this point. Since the gardener was, okay, so that's, I mean, what more is there to tell us about the case, really? I mean, what else kind of stands out for you on here, Naomi?
I think what stands out is that like we found with a lot of intimate partner murder cases, that there isn't a history of abuse that's kind of outside the house, that's prevalent outside the house. So and also the way this was done, it was kind of so abrupt, and it makes me wonder if he didn't have an episode, and there was no build up. Also, according to him, according to the family, according to the girls, they were not fighting. According to the church, according to the friends, no one actually knew they were fighting, having problems in their marriage. So it kind of just felt like it was out of the blue. And that was what was strange. And it was just a very sad case. Like I said, girls losing both parents. Such an but I think divorce was out of the question because they were married in community of property. He also was under debt review. So I think a lot of things, and I think ultimately it was about money. Actually, as simple as that is. So just a sad case.
Yeah. Candace made the comment. I mean, we know that there wasn't, you're saying that not necessarily kind of evidence of violence, but was there any evidence of coercive control? Were there other, maybe not outward violence, but any other kind of flags within the relationship that you were aware of?
Thank you for the question. I think not per se in the way that we would think about coercive control, that he's manipulative and things like that. I think he was downplaying his role as kind of like someone that's not contributing enough to the relationship and playing the victim card a lot. Also, like I mentioned, she was a vibrant person, and he was, with lack of other words, kind of like a pathetic person, not really good employment history, not really a manly man, not really an outstanding figure in the community, things like that. He used to take the kids to school, and like I said, didn't hold a job for long. So I think he thought that she would be able to go on with her life, but he would not. He would not be able to find someone like her, and she would very easily find someone else, probably better than him.
For sure. Here's an interesting one. From Gillian again. Wonder if he would have been fit to stand trial given his mental health issues.
Yeah, like I mean, it would depends. I mean, there's two aspects with regards to how mental health issues play a role in a criminal act. At the time of the incident, was the person reacting to voices? Was he having a manic episode and he kind of, ended up assaulting someone in a manic phase? So during the incident, that's possible. Then if it's found to be directly related to the crime, that you might be found unfit or lacking criminal capacity, so we couldn't prosecute you. The other option is, during the incident, you were relatively normal, but now you're starting to exhibit symptoms a week, a month, a year later as you get close to the trial. They'll also send you for observation, but the difference is if you're found not to have been mentally ill at the time of the actual incident, but you are now found to be mentally ill now, the trial will stop and you'll probably go to a place like Bescorpies or government hospital. But once you're better, the trial's going to continue. So it kind of depends whether the mental health is relevant to the incident, or is it relevant to later on as we're trying about to go and put you on trial? Because obviously you have to be able to consult with your lawyers, in touch with reality as you prepare for your defense. So the one just would mean that everything pauses, but will continue later on when you're better. And the other one, if it's during the incident, and they confirm that, yes, you were reacting to voices that told you to stab this person, you can never be prosecuted if that is the case during the actual incident itself. But of course, the other question would be here, what happens to these two cases? So in the instance where it looks like your suspect has committed suicide, Liezel's murder would then end up in front of a magistrate for an inquest, who would then make a finding that this is a murder. Is there someone that could be held responsible? He might say, yes, it's the husband, or yes, but we don't know who it is, and that case would be filed. And of course, his own suicide would have its own inquest, in other words, investigation into it, and also be presented to a magistrate who would then confirm it that it is a suicide. So there's always some kind of legal closure of an unnatural death, even if the suspect is dead.
Okay. Yeah, because then, how is there that sense of justice for the family, isn't it? There's kind of that opportunity to get that little piece of, again, we don't talk of this as resolution, do we? Because the pain of these things never go away, but at least it gives you some closure, a little bit of closure,
And of course, in terms of the inheritance, that'll now go to the two kids. It'll probably be put into a trust. One of the grandparents will probably be made one of the trustees, and that money will be then used, obviously, for them to survive and hopefully get a good education and their sort of daily needs, just at a point of interest from the inheritance.
Okay. Henry asks, do you think she was ashamed of him?
No, I don't think so. I think to a certain degree she felt sorry for him, and she remained in the relationship knowing that he had a history of committing or attempting to commit suicide. So I think her actually leaving, she was afraid that that will actually push him off the edge. And that being said, she was also a pastor in church, so divorce is really not something that I think is kind of allowed or not allowed, but it's kind of, yeah, it's not seen with pastors. So I think she was more ashamed of what other people would say if the relationship didn't make it. But no, I think as far as a friend said, her relatives, she actually loved him, and she wanted to help him more than being ashamed of him.
Okay. So just tragic then, unfortunately. All right. Well, I mean, I feel like we've probably covered the majority of the case here. Is there anything that we haven't discussed that you would highlight or point out here, Naomi?
No, I just want to comment on Gerard's comment with regards to the mental issues and fitness to stand trial. I actually did mention non-pathological criminal incapacity in my analysis of the crime scene. And even if he wanted to claim that in the trial, there were certain actions before and after that we've kind of excluded that because he kind of functioned in a very logical way. From his cell phone, the discussions that he had. I mean, like, I think he actually had a discussion that morning of wanting to buy something from someone. So whilst his wife was lying in the driveway or in the small corridor. So that was just a remark I wanted to leave with.
Okay. All right. I'm maybe if we can move away from the case a little bit and just wrap up the discussion. You know, from your time at SAPS there, I mean, what did you consider to be, you know, the really great things that you took out of that experience? What were maybe some of the hardest parts of it, and what led you to leave?
Thank you for that. I really like my time in SAPS, and I do miss it. I think almost daily. Being in the middle of things, being able to know all the facts within a case. Whereas if you're in private practice like myself now, it's not always easy to get that information. So that was kind of like the up for it. Down parts, working with a lot of bodies, a lot of victims, especially young, old people, vulnerable victims, that kind of like you do not necessarily want to take it home, but if you are in a similar situation, like I have two young kids, then that tend to come home with you. So you also have to deal with that work-life balance. Yeah, what's the other question?
What ultimately kind of pushed you to leave, or made you decide that you'd kind of you'd had your time there?
If it was up to me, I would still be in the police. I
Okay.
wasn't fired or anything. But I did take a part-time lecturing position at a varsity, and it kind of filled my glass more than it emptied my glass. And knowing what I knew from all the death and things I've seen, I thought going forward as a mother, I needed to kind of distance myself for my own mental health. So I took a full-time position this year and or semi full-time, still part-time, but a lot more classes, and started my own business to kind of also spend time with my family and make my own hours. So, but like I said, I do miss it. The police is still in my system a bit.
The one thing that we talk about is the fact that, you know, when experienced personnel leave, all of that experience and all of that knowledge tends to leave with them. Do you continue to have any relationship with the police? Do they call on you for anything, or do you offer assistance and it's welcomed? Or
Yes. I would love to work with the police, and not just the police. I think there's a lot of a big shortage of criminologists in the private sector. I'm actually attempting my PhD on that specific topic, privatization of criminology in South Africa. So I think there's a big gap for private criminologists in South Africa. And saying that, I think also within the police, within the correctional office, I know we've all heard about the backlog of parole reports and the shortage of criminologists in that department. So I think yes, I do have still contact with some of the members I've worked with. I think that will probably last a lifetime. And yeah, I would love to collaborate with the police. But also, again, if you go into private practice, the opposite is also true. You're going to have to collaborate with the defense as well.
Yes.
Yeah, so that will be tricky.
Okay. And what else? Where else are you turning your expertise to? I mean, you've also started doing a bit of this, creating a bit of content. Tell us a little bit about that as well, and let's give it a plug. And how can we? We're very big on supporting our true crime community and our fellow creators. So tell us a little bit about what you've got going on there and what your plans are, and where can people find you?
Yeah, thank you. Also knowing that social media is kind of like the way forward, I started a small channel or a YouTube channel called More Than Just Facts with Naomi Griffiths. I kind of also saw the gap in my university students in with relation to applying theories and the actual criminological concepts to cases. There was a very big gap there. So I'm trying to fill that gap, although yeah, it's very, very new. I'm also still learning on my age now about social media and things. My children will probably teach me in about 10 years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for myself. Okay, great. So, and we'll actually put a link to your channel on the page after this as well, so that folks can go. We've got a section where we put kind of friends of the channel, other channels that we like and enjoy, and that we kind of keen to work with. And we'd love to have you back on the podcast in the future. And anything that we can do to help out you, just let us know. We'd love to.
Thank you so much.
We're all for assisting.
Excellent.
In that
Thank
effort.
you so much, Naomi.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Gerard, what are your final comments and thoughts here tonight?
Yeah, I think as often with the guests that we speak to, they've left we can't really speak to people when they're still in the police, so we tend to speak to people now outside of the police, and it's always sad that I think everybody kind of says that they really love the work they used to do, but just circumstances changed in their lives, or just the environment became one where you just kind of feel it's time for you to go. And I think that's always so sad. And like you say, you kind of, once you're gone, the police and other, you don't really get used anymore by the police, because the police just doesn't have that mindset to make use of people who are no longer working for them. It's just a mind shift that's just too far beyond. So that's sad. And again, just intimate partner murder is a sad reality in our country. And what we can do to stop it from happening, it's very difficult. As Naomi says, things happen behind the closed doors that we never find out sometimes until it's too late. But thank you, Naomi.
I would definitely imagine that looking more closely at mental health issues within relationships and, recognizing some of those flags, and hopefully just these kinds of conversations will help to enlighten people as to what some of the warning signs are, if there are, potentially destructive issues, issues that could escalate and get a lot worse happening within a relationship. I'm sure that hopefully there's at least some takeout from these conversations in that regard. Yeah.
All right. And I just want to say that it looks as if I was watching the little eye on the top left-hand corner, which shows how many viewers we had. I think we got up to 95. And I think that's a record. I don't think we've ever had that many people. I think the last record was about 85 people
for the live,
any given for the live. So that's well done to you, Naomi.
Yeah.
I think it's well done to the case, though. It's a very interesting case, and
Absolutely.
The cases that make the headlines is always kind of very interesting for everyone. I remember, and this is, I will leave one remark, I now have no stories to tell around the Braaivleis feed. So, unfortunately, people really listen to me. Yeah.
Well, we're going to invite you back to talk about some more of your cases in the future, if that's okay, Naomi.
Thank you.
Adding you to the Rolodex, the profiler Rolodex.
For sure.
all of Gerard's great friends and colleagues and folks, from the South African crime universe. So, guys, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. We really appreciate all of you joining the chat. To our regulars and to any new folks joining the chat tonight, so great to have you. Thanks for your comments. Thank you once again to Katzen for your contributing to the show. We appreciate you. Thank you, everyone, for a great episode. There's Katzen. Thank you very much. And thank you for your contribution. Don't forget that you can become members of the channel. Just a little donation every month, and you get some excellent additional content, and you're doing a good thing as well. So thank you, Naomi. Thank you, Gerard. It's been a wonderful conversation as always. I will see you again next week, Gerard, and Naomi, we will see you again in the near future, hopefully. And good luck with the YouTube channel and all of your other endeavors, feeding young minds into the system. That's certainly a worthy cause.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. Don't forget to subscribe. Don't forget to share the podcast. Become a member, all that jazz. We appreciate you. We've had a great time once again bringing you another episode of Profiler Africa. We're going to say goodnight, and don't forget to keep looking over your shoulder, everybody.
I am a human being and I kill human beings.
Before I knew it, I'd fired 4 shots at the door. I kept on shouting for Eva to phone the police.
Tests are underway to determine if a serial killer is on the loose in Centurion, Pretoria.
The dead won't bother you. It's the living you gotta worry about.